Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Database. Got MJ and myself, David here. Um, I'm actually in the middle of moving house right now, so that's part of the reason. Things are a little bit delayed, and that's when I think like in this challenging times is where it's good to actually work with someone on different projects and MJ on this YouTube channel for this case. That he's like, hey David, when are we gonna do the next one? Where we need to do the next one. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that motivation actually really helps. So here we are on a very exciting topic because in the previous video we talk about getting Fabric running the reporting side, and one of the things that MJ pick up from that is how does the integration side actually works at the kind of like a higher level, right? The different methods for Fabric to integrate with so many different data sources. So it's a very interesting topic, and I think it's one of the key differentiators as well. So I'll hand it
Awesome.
over to you, MJ.
All right. Thanks, David. Yeah. By the way, just to build up on what you said earlier, because a lot of these things, what we're doing, there's no real urgency or deadline. That's why it's kind of like hard to put time on this, especially when you're in your situation, right? Of moving houses and like there's also work stuff that you have to do and everything. Um, and that kind of like resonates with the theme that I also want to discuss about today, with Fabric. We're in like Um, because I've been with the Fabric journey for a while now, probably around 15, 16 months now. Like I've had a lot of conversations already. I had a lot of experience with the platform, and like the common thing that resonates or like being asked is, oh, it's yet another new thing that we have to move on or migrate into, or like, oh, it's yet another new thing that we have to think of, right, and integrate here and there. And the more I spend time with Fabric, the more I realize that actually Fabric adopts this concept of like an open system or like an open kind of like system wherein you don't necessarily have to move everything to Fabric, right? You can just get started with one thing, or let's say leverage your existing data elsewhere and use some aspects of Fabric for things, right? Because as we have already discussed a couple of times, like Fabric is not just Power BI report, right? There's also pipelines, there's notebooks, there's like many different capabilities like real time. Um, so now it begs the question of like how does this work then? Integrating with Fabric with existing workflows here and there. Um, and that's a very common question that's being asked all the time. Like, what if I already have Databricks, right? What if I have SSIS, SSRS capability on-prem, and like, where do I put in Fabric, right? So a lot of those obvious questions is being asked, and you can't just say move everything to Fabric, right? There needs to be a pathway or like a proper plan on how to get there, or like there's also needs to be a further discussion and like the separation or like the logical reasoning of what's in Fabric, what's not in Fabric, right? So what better way to do that by referencing to this um, module or learn content, which is Microsoft Fabric integration pathways for ISVs. Um, it doesn't necessarily just have to be for ISVs, but for those who are on the receiving end, meaning like whether you're in consulting or you are the customer building Fabric capabilities, and like this gives you a really good understanding of how a lot of these different things can come in together. So yeah, like I told earlier, Fabric adopts that open architecture wherein you can interrupt with Fabric, one leg. You can develop apps on Fabric. You can build a Fabric workload, and so on and so forth. Like things like interrupt. Yeah, these are like the key capabilities that Fabric really has. Like one, there's a API for OneLake. Again, that unified storage for Fabric. Then there's real-time intelligence. There's Data Factory, shortcuts, data sharing, and mirroring. Right. So these are kind of like ways to integrate with OneLake. And if you kind of like wants to work with Fabric or integrate with Fabric with other workloads or other tooling, it's most likely you're working with integrating with OneLake itself. Because at the end of the day, you need to store data to OneLake, or you need to get data from OneLake, right? So OneLake has APIs, because it adopts that same hierarchical format of an ADLS Gen 2, meaning you can kind of like interact with it similar to how you interact with an ADLS Gen 2 using REST API for in some instances, let's say, like let's say you have a Spark notebook elsewhere, you can point to OneLake by using that same methodology, right, on how you interact with ADLS. The thing that then that kind of like goes into a conversation of Databricks in particular, right? So because Databricks has so many overlapping use cases as well and capabilities with Fabric, um, it's sometimes a bit hard to gauge which one, when to use Databricks, when to use Fabric capabilities. Um, I guess we can approach it at least in two major use case. Number one is you already have an existing data on an Azure Databricks instance, and that's hosted in an ADLS Gen 2. Okay, again, it really works well, especially if you're already in Azure, right, and you're using Azure Databricks. So the underlying storage that you're using for that is ADLS Gen 2. So that means that you can do all the transformations. You can do your medallion architecture, bronze, silver, gold in Databricks. You can do things like all the goodness that Databricks offer, Unity catalog and stuff like that. And then once you want to do the reporting aspect, let's say in Power BI, what you can do is kind of like the OneLake of Fabric can set a shortcut to the ADLS Gen 2 storage that you're using for Databricks, right? Especially like, let's say the gold layer of that one. Like you can take a shortcut from OneLake onto the gold layer, and your Power BI capability or reporting within Fabric can kind of like leverage the goodness of data being processed by Databricks, right? Does that make sense so far, David? Like that concept, right? Like do everything in Databricks since you're storing it in ADLS Gen 2, then in OneLake you just kind of like set a shortcut and then do your reporting.
Yeah, so because of that overlap, and if the user already have Databricks, which a lot of large organizations already do, then they don't need to think about, they don't need to worry themselves about, oh, I have to migrate all the data in Databricks into Fabric before I can do the work. They can simply just create a shortcut, and you're saying for that shortcut, they can actually choose which layer they get access to from Fabric. Let's say it's golden. So all the other work from bronze to gold still happens in Databricks, but from the reporting side, they can then utilize Fabric or Power BI and just get access to the gold layer.
Exactly, right. That's one way of doing it, right? And the other way as well is let's say you want to migrate to Fabric, right? Like for other reasons. Let's say you just want a consolidated licensing model. You just want to maintain everything in OneLake. You don't want to have like 20 different ADLS Gen 2 storage to maintain. Like those are some of the reasons why you want to perform some migrations, right, from a Databricks to Fabric. If you're on that journey of like moving to the Fabric wholeheartedly, like end to end, then that's when you now discuss about, like I guess the first thing again is get the Power BI thing sorted, right? And then from there, try to slowly migrate the pipelines, try to move the notebooks, and then come to a point wherein you're not using ADLS Gen 2 anymore. You're just doing everything in OneLake. Because like when you go to things like synapse data engineering or even data factory, you don't necessarily have to interface with OneLake all the time. So you can also target an ADLS Gen 2 source for that one, right? Because the compute layer is separate from the storage layer, which is OneLake. So that kind of like capability comes in. Yeah, and then obviously there's also things like doing like beyond the shortcut, you can also do things like sharing or mirroring through an Azure SQL, right? Again, that's another one way of doing it. I guess the key message I want to put in here is that there's you don't need to move full in with Fabric on day one, right? It could be a journey, and you probably need to have a good reason why you're doing that reinvestment somehow. Okay.
So let's say if the data is currently in Databricks, it's in a like blob storage, and so you're saying that slowly the user can then migrate, instead of pointing to the blob storage, it can point to OneLake, but that will happen gradually rather than everything in one hit.
Exactly, right. Exactly. So maybe you just want to do silver layer first, right? So Silver transformations can work with, let's say, using the Synapse data engineering capability, and you create a lake house, right? And then from there, later on, you now move into creating the bronze again, maybe using Data Factory as well for that one, um, you know, so on and so forth, right? Like that migration it's not like one-off migration. That could be gradual, and it could be like per project as well, or per workload, or per layer. So again, many different ways to address that. Okay, so now I'm gonna move on to this real-time intelligence one, and I think this is very important or very nice because my observation as well is that for those who are moving or like trying to consider Fabric, they want to look at Fabric in terms of like what's actually new, what's different from other capabilities out there. And real-time intelligence is one of those that's kind of like being highlighted as like the new workload thing, like a new initiative, new data kind of like a workload capability or like new stuff all in all. Because again, right, like doing the whole ETL, ELT, and like chunking, crunching gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes of data that's been addressed multiple times before, right? But real time, one, it's kind of like new with Fabric, and it's kind of like one of the compelling offerings of Fabric, and at the same time, these are kind of like emerging problems as well and emerging opportunities that we're seeing. We're in back then, the problem was scale for your cloud or your database, but now it's about, hey, how do I have access to the data straight away? Like that real time requirement all the time. And Fabric has this capability of real time intelligence, wherein you can have various sources, use the event streaming capability, then put it in an event house, or formerly known as KQL database, and then stream that directly to Power BI. So I don't know if we've talked about this before, David, but when you talk about Power BI being a real-time dashboard in the past, it's arguably hard to sell that because again, you have to do direct import or direct query, right? So when you say Power BI can do real-time analytics, it's gonna be a hard thing to sell, right? But with this new concept of like event streaming and event housing built in within Fabric itself, co-located, co-tenanted with Power BI service. Now it's making much more sense. It's the same um, selling factor of the direct link capability, right? Because you're already literally sitting on the data, then you don't need to import anything. You're just using Power BI to display that real-time data. So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of this happening at the moment, exploring Fabric as a way to put these real-time workloads.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I think I don't know whether so with Power BI, for example, there's like a method called streaming data sets, and that you can actually get the report to almost look live. That you can do it. Otherwise, people still need to hit that refresh button. It would be nice to see once this kind of real time capability is mature in well, it's already mature. It's not the right word, but well, once you get to Fabric,
More
it would be good
adopted,
to
yeah.
actually for that Power BI element to actually be added as well, so people can actually more easily get data into the streaming data set or other formats and kind of see that live updates from the reporting side. Because when people say real time, if everybody still have to hit the refresh button, it's not like
Yeah.
exactly what people are kind of expecting when they say real time. But at least with this one, the backend will be real time, and it's a really nice way
Yes.
to integrate all of them into the one lake architecture.
Exactly right. Because you're not using the analysis services capability of Power BI here, right? Which kind of like acts as a bridge in the past, right? Like, so you always need that analysis services that kind of like acts as a bridge between Power BI and the source, right? Whether it's real time or not real time. So yeah, like this time around, right? Like again, you make that analysis services a bit obsolete because you don't need to duplicate data anymore. You don't need to transfer data anymore. It's literally just there. Right? Yeah, so there's that, and then Fabric Data Factory. We'll probably just go into this very lightly, but um, basically, in Fabric Data Factory, there are like three methods of doing data factory or like ingestion. One is the like the data pipeline that many are familiar already when it can come from Azure Data Factory, and then there's data flows, which are those coming from Power BI, are much more familiar with. That's similar with Power Query, And then there's a third one, which is using DAGs and using Apache Airflow, which are, for those who are not on Azure or using other cloud, Airflow is kind of like one of those popular approach on doing ingestion, and that's supported as well within Fabric Data Factory. So again, multiple options on like how do you get data from this to that, like which one to use. Do I use data flows? Do I use pipelines? Do I use notebooks? Do I use DAGs? Again, Fabric is not telling you to just choose one. Choose what makes sense for those scenarios. Yeah, again, I can't just emphasize that enough, because even between pipelines and data flows now, you can't argue and say, oh, data flows are slow and stuff like that, because again, you're living in that SaaS world of co-tenanted, everything's co-located, and data flows Gen 2 now supports fast copy as well. So again, it's very subjective now.
Yeah. I mean, they are kind of all interrelated now. You can call data flow in a pipeline as well. You can call notebook in a pipeline, and I think that the line is kind of blurring as well. But what I like about it is the flexibility is there, and you can kind of pick and choose what makes sense, maybe for a particular project, maybe for a particular data set, and do it that way, rather than you have to use like one method.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, then next one is the shortcuts. I think we loosely talked about shortcut in the point of view of Azure, but this is also very strategic for Fabric, that they're going into this concept of instead of forcing to move everything, all the data into one lake, just use shortcut, at least in the beginning, right? Like I can now, I can still do my workloads, Power BI and data engineering, and leverage all of those goodness and doing transformations, even if the data is not really in one lake. So again, that's a really good step that they're doing here. Yeah, and also there's Dataverse. You're probably much more familiar with Dataverse than me, but that kind of like entices people as well, coming from that, that capability into Fabric, right? So there's like Fabric kind of like encourages you to get started wherever you're coming from, right? Like, and if you need some of these capabilities, use them, right? So that's why when you talk about Fabric, is Fabric for pro developers, non-pro developers? Is this for data engineers, data scientists, or what? It could be everyone. It's like asking who uses OneDrive or who uses SharePoint. Depends. Like everyone can use it. Depends on what are you storing in there. Depends on what are you using it for, right? I think they're going to that direction, which I really like. Data sharing, again, this is more on like from different tenancy. You can kind of like share within the same tenancy. You can do like cross workspace, cross tenant and cross workspace data sharing. So that's a good thing as well. Lastly, mirroring. So I think I like shortcut. What I like about mirroring is that this actually kind of like sets a reverse replica of your transactional database. What do I mean by that is that because we go back again to that OLTP versus OLAP workload, right? And if a database was set up to be an OLTP and it's being used by applications, so there's a heavy write, heavy inserts happening in there, right? So it's configured to do heavy inserts. And what you don't want ended up happening is, oh, there's this process that keeps on querying, doing a massive read of that data, and if you do it, then it could potentially slow down the application, right? Because you have to finish the transaction of that giant read. So the way to address that is to create a replica, a read-only replica, right? And then with the read-only replica, the analytics workloads can use the read-only replica without affecting the transactional database. But what mirroring does, it's kind of like the reverse. Like instead of you setting up a SQL Azure read-only replica to use by Fabric, Fabric is the one kind of like co-hosting that read replica for you, so that compute and that kind of like storage classification or that workload is being ran on Fabric instead of troubling the Azure resource. And you can even look here, it's not just Azure, even Snowflake, even GCP, right? So it's doing that reverse replica concept. And I think this is very novel. Like I don't know how this works architecturally speaking, or how does that work like in a like fine detail, but I really like this concept, so that you
Mm.
still have access to that source of truth, right? Like, or that source without doing change data capture, or data copying, or transformation, ETL, ELT, right? Yeah, and lastly, now Fabric is opening that doors to for you to create more workloads beyond the data engineering, science, warehousing, real-time intelligence, Power BI. So that means that they're now opening the doors for you to create your own either application or data workload. Let's say you want to create a workload on migrating from a legacy 1990s or 1980s database into Fabric, then you can create that workload, right?
So,
Or let's say you have a specific application, let's say a supply chain application that you want to use, but want to put all the data in one lake, and you can have that app layer in there as well. That kind of like shows that. And yeah, that comes with the custom Fabric workload APIs, and that's where a lot of this kind of like upcoming custom workloads is going to be really nice, because that means you can leverage a lot of the goodness in Fabric, and still kind of like put all the data together, piece them together.
so is this so the workload concept, is this like, for example, in shipping or in banking, we deal with a lot of legacy system, just using legacy system as an example, since you mentioned. So I can create a workload to target one of the as a ISV, to target one of the legacy systems. So I streamline the way of, okay, this is how you connect to it, this is how you bring it into, whichever layer for storage, and then this is how you then standardize the transformation process. And
Yeah,
then by the time it finished the workload, the user actually have a ready data set they can actually just connect to without
exactly.
having to worry about,
Exactly.
okay. And then the beauty of that one from a ISV perspective is then, okay, this is targeted for this industry, so it can be generalized. Anyone in the industry who's using connecting to that legacy system is a potential sell opportunity for the ISV to go, hey,
Yeah,
is
exactly. And like, yeah, you nailed it. Like that industry specific, right? Like because beyond SQL Server, Oracle, IBM, and AWS and GCP data sources, there are so many databases. There are so many data types in the world, right? Like things like what's being used by that X-ray machine, what's being used by that car, what's being used by that transport system, right? Like for sure that data is stored somewhere. So when you try to think of it that way, and then you wanna like still leverage the goodness that Fabric offers, then that openness, workload, setup, and capability just makes sense, so that you can still work things together.
so it's like there will be like a marketplace of
Yeah,
workloads, and
yes,
people can
exactly.
go key in that like name of the legacy system, and yeah, pick the one that seems to be relevant and just pay for it, or there might be a free one kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it could also be the reverse as well. So it's not like just about putting everything to one lake, right? Maybe you have data in one lake, but you want to see it differently. For example, Neo4j is a graph, database setup, right? Then using that custom workload of Neo4j, you can visualize your one lake data into a graph, right? So again, it's so many ways to extend extend that.
Right. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I guess this goes back, in summary, and Fabric is really setting up that open platform, which I really like, not forcing you to migrate everything in there. Just pick and choose what makes sense for you at that moment. Um, yeah, and then there you go. Like I'm just very excited on like few years from now when people talk about Fabric, it's not just Power BI, it's not just Synapse. There's so many things you can do in here.
Yeah, 100%. There's like so Microsoft is trying to become this kind of platform, like the best platform on almost everything. And in data space, Fabric is so unique in its capability to just integrate, to connect to so many different things. And yeah, like, and the combining with the compute and storage in the Azure side of things, you can do like, reporting, you can do the science, pipelining, you dive pretty deep into the AI side of things with Cosmo DB as well. So the
exactly. Yeah,
whole ecosystem is going to be
yeah,
so
and
powerful, right?
yeah, and like just think of, man, like all the 90s written C++ data adapters back in the day, storing data somewhere using C++ for transformation and everything. Like even that can be moved to Fabric, man. Like modernize that somehow. Um,
Wow.
yeah. Again, man, like we'll do it one video at a time. But I'm just excited, man, on where this is going.
Yeah, no, definitely sounds amazing. Well, thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoy the content, please subscribe or follow us, and looking forward to the next video.